In part 1 of this video series, we discussed how the state, i.e. government, is a social organism whose relationship with its constituents can be described as one of parasitic mutualism. We also covered an example of how the state uses what Franz Oppenheimer refers to as, quote, political means, that is to say, coercion and force to amass power and wealth. In part 2, I want to lay a little more groundwork by using one more example, SSA Title IV Part D. I don't know how many of you are familiar with SSA, Social Security Act, Title IV Part D legislation, but the legal language is such a pain in the ass to read and understand that many of us understandably don't even try. As with other laws that have questionable parts to them, the preamble reads great, but as they say, the devil is in the details. Once I started digging into the details, I had a hard time believing Section 458 was law, a law that most men aren't even aware of. I'm surprised, but I don't know why, that this law hasn't gotten any significant press coverage in the mainstream media. In the description box below, I have included a link to an article published by the National Parents Organization about Title IV Part D, Section 458, its apparent dangers and collaboration with the domestic violence, or DV, industry. After reading this article and doing some research, the motivation behind some of the crazy support orders and onerous DV language becomes apparent. The article states, and I quote, "The federal program of child support enforcement that every state in the United States adheres to in an effort to secure money from non-custodial parents and diverts it to custodial parents so that these parents can use the monies for their children." Well, sort of. The problem with child support enforcement is that this agency has a forward-facing public side that most people have been socialized to accept. When thinking about child support and the enforcement of non-custodial parents, we surmise that most people believe that enforcement is a wonderful program that has the sole purpose of taking care of children. And in most cases, this is true. Nobody at Fathers and Fathers has any problem with both parents supporting their children. If one parent is purposefully absent, then enforcement of child support is a good thing. However, there is a rear-facing side to child support enforcement that is not well known or talked about much by judges, politicians, and many special interest groups. This fact being that there is an industry surrounding enforcement that is replenishing money for welfare, TAFT, and other low-income assistance programs. In looking at Federal Social Security Act, Title IV, Part D, Section 458, you will see language that allows the U.S. federal government to give back, quote, incentive payments to U.S. states for performance-based child support collection, paternity establishment, and administrative cost. Typically, these incentive payments go back to social services programs because the thinking is that after a divorce, many women will end up using programs like TAP and welfare, which U.S. states have little money in their budgets for. While the exact amount of money is hard to define because of performance and the fact that different states get back different amounts, many studies show that the average is for every $1 collected in child support, $1 is released from Social Security coffers that can be given back to the states. In our thinking, there are several problems with child support enforcement. If U.S. states are dependent on this federal money from the collection of child support, then there is also a dependence on the non-custodial parents not having equal access to their children so that they can pay greater child support, which triggers the release of more federal money. Fathers and Fathers has serious concerns that the enforcement of child support is in direct conflict with equal shared parenting for all parents and extended families. Under equally shared parenting, many non-custodial parents would pay considerably less child support because of increased time with their children, or they would pay no child support at all. Under equal parenting, there is significantly less federal money available for welfare programs, and most U.S. states would be in financial crisis trying to solve funding for low-income programs because of it. Close quote. In other words, U.S. states and judges get kickbacks from collecting child support and alimony. The more they collect, right, wrong, or indifferent, the bigger the bonus. The article continues, quote, "Another issue that is very frightening for our organization is that most child support enforcement programs are housed under U.S. health and human services agencies like social services. Typically, these agencies investigate cases of child abuse, neglect, and dependency, and they often have legislative immunity from any wrong they may commit. Historically, social services agencies have been about providing services for women and children, and we are concerned that in many cases, especially those involving child protective services matters, that social services policies and procedures have enforcement mentality in mind when dealing with non-custodial families. while being geared towards service provider for custodial mothers. Furthermore, social services knows that if any child abuse, neglect, or dependency case can be made on the father, then he will pay greater child support. Again, this will also lead to greater Title 4D money being delivered back to the state. In essence, social services needs for non-custodial parents to exist, and they need them having little visitation, if any, with their children, so they pay greater amount of child support that can be enforced by the federal government. Close quote. It's legislation like Title 4 Part D that leads to issues like this.
Now to attend News Channel 3, getting to the bottom of a burning question one Memphis man has been trying to answer for years. Why is Shelby County Juvenile Court forcing him to pay for a child that is not biologically his? What's even more unusual, he says the judges at Juvenile Court have an idea who the real father is.
Yet they're still demanding he pay up. Now he's turning to On Your Side investigator Stephanie Skurlock for help.
Talk show TV makes millions off the catchphrase, "You are not the father." But the reality in Memphis is just because you're not the daddy doesn't mean Shelby County Juvenile Court won't make you pay.
I was down there in handcuffs and chains.
Over the years, Edward Bowdery had his driver's license stripped and once even found himself in handcuffs over child support payments for a child that's not his.
I would hate to see somebody else go through the same thing. I've been going through this. Headaches.
This mound of paperwork shows a juvenile court judge ordered him to pay child support even before the birth.
I didn't do a voluntary acknowledgement. I didn't sign the birth certificate. All I know is we legitimated the child in your name.
Bowdery asked several judges during several hearings for a DNA test, but no judge ordered one.
I said, how did I even get put on child support? And I never said this was my child. And they said, again, this is not what we're here for.
In 2009, he took the child himself to get a DNA test and found the son he'd supported for years was not biologically his. He took the documentation to court. The judge wouldn't accept it, but ordered a new DNA test done that showed the same results. Probability of paternity, 0%.
They never did do what they were originally supposed to do, which was give me the opportunity to take a DNA test. I was just a voice not being heard, so I guess I needed a choir.
Juvenile Court Magistrate Nancy Kessler agreed in October to allow Bowdery to disestablish paternity, but only after, he says, she admonished him for taking it this far.
The judge stated that, well, I find it very distasteful that you're bastardizing a child.
The judge stopped the child support going forward, but Bowdery still has to pay $460 a month to the mother in back pay. He doesn't believe he should have to pay anything. In fact, he believes someone owes him money, the $30,000 he's already paid.
When a divorced dad was ordered to pay child support for a child who isn't his, he turned to our Target 8 investigators for help. We uncovered it's perfectly legal for the state to order him to pay support for another man's child and to deny biological fathers who want to pay from doing so. Target 8's Heather Walker exposes a law that's being called outrageous.
What's going on, buddy?
Joseph Shamilar is a divorced dad of 2. Not even 9 months after the split, Joe got some shocking news from his boys.
And they got in the car and they were bouncing up and down, telling me that Mom has a new baby. And I said, well, is she babysitting? Is she, is she looking after someone?
So you didn't think it was real?
No, I had no idea.
His ex-wife had given birth. She had gotten pregnant during their separation by another man. Legally, she was still married to Joe. Court papers clearly acknowledge the baby is not Joe's, but Albert Bush's, and that Bush had established a personal, financial, or custodial relationship with the child. The court ordered medical expenses be split between the biological parents. But the Friday before Father's Day, Joe got a letter in the mail from friend of the court.
I thought, my God, this is hilarious. It's Father's Day weekend, and here's the biggest joke that I think I've ever had played on me transpiring right now.
The letter said he owed $8,500 in back child support plus medical expenses for a baby his ex-wife had with another man. So the court was asking you to pay for a child that's not yours.
Exactly.
I went to Ottawa County front of the court office to get answers. How is this legal? Their spokesperson agreed to do an on-camera interview, but on the scheduled day changed his mind and would only answer our questions over the phone. He told us it didn't matter who the biological dad is, only what's in the best interest of the child. In other words, which one can take best care of the child financially. The court decided that was Joe.
Do you think this law needs to be changed in any way?
We went straight to the man who tried to fix the law, Senator Rick Jones.
I certainly would agree that if you're married to someone, they then run off and have a child by another man, that you should not have to pay child support. That seems a bit outrageous.
What's the biggest problem with the law and the language, would you say?
It's not clearly drafted.
Melissa Drake is Joe's attorney. She tells us the law isn't just failing him, it's not working for biological dads either. Rob Recknagel says he's had trouble eating and sleeping since his son was born.
Every single day that goes by that I don't get to see him, it just gets tougher. I don't know what he looks like.
Rob says he searched online hospital nurseries just to see if he could find his son. He says he didn't know his girlfriend was still married when they got together. Rob says they were planning to blend their families. Rob bought a ring, but before she gave birth, Rob says he got this email saying although the baby was his, she was going to raise it with her husband.
I'm standing here saying I want my son in my life. I want to pay child support. Let's sign the proper documents and let me just do that.
You're trying to do the right thing.
That's all I want.
Carnell Alexander is being ordered to pay back child support for a child that is not his. The Detroit man says it's a matter he has tried to fix for years, but again and again he's found himself confused by the legal process.
Now, after we told you about his story, an attorney stepped in to help out, but is it too late? 7 Action News reporter Kim Russell joins us now on a story that has a judge ruling in this case.
It's a story that inspired outrage. Carnell Alexander says he got a shock during a traffic stop in Detroit in the early 90s. The officer told him he's a deadbeat dad, he's under arrest. The problem? Carnell didn't have any kids. He'd been made a dad by default after an ex listed him as father when applying for welfare benefits. The notice of hearing went to a house, not prison, where he was incarcerated. Today he went to court hoping a judge would fix it. Instead, his story inspired a different kind of outrage.
I'm outraged that Mr. Alexander, for 2.5 decades, failed to take this matter seriously.
Judge Kathleen McCarthy ruled he waited too long to let the court know what happened.
And I just feel like it's unfair.
But Carnell says that's not exactly accurate, that he's gone to court many times and every time has told the judge that he's been in front of that he's not the father, that he shouldn't have to pay for that child.
Every court appearance that she say I made it clear to them that I was not the father of the child. And I was trying to reach out to Ms. Hood, who I could not reach.
However, that doesn't stop the fact that he needed help.
His attorney, Cherika Harris, says she took on this case after hearing about it on 7 Action News. As a result, she says she was shocked when the judge not only said a man will pay for a kid that's not his, but criticized 7 Action News for sharing the story.
I'm outraged at the media for their willful misrepresentations of the facts of this case, casting this court in a negative light with little to no facts to support these claims.
You were inspired by our story to step in and take on this case. Did you feel that you were misled at all?
I don't feel I was misled because everything you reported seems to me to still be true.
Attorney Harris says she will file more motions for Carnell. In Detroit, Kim Russell, 7 Action News.
This is incredible. In the case of the Tennessee man, this man is a victim of paternity fraud, yet the judge tries to shame him, saying it's, quote, shameful that he is bastardizing a child. Not the biological father, nor the woman who committed fraud against him, but they're blaming the victim. And this judge, Kathleen McCarthy, here we have a judge who is perfectly okay screwing over an innocent man, making him accountable for $30,000 of debt that isn't even his. And her reason is because he waited too long? You got to be kidding me. He was also screwed because he has to defend in court an old lie. And even after the court found that his ex-girlfriend had falsified documents, did they try to punish her in any way? Hell no. Again, instead of putting the blame where it clearly belongs with the lying woman who knowingly committed fraud, the judge tries to shame the victim and the media for bringing this debacle to light. Bottom line is the only reason why the state is pursuing this is because the money is now owed to the state. In cases like these, They don't give the mother any of the so-called back child support they steal from non-biological fathers because they've already paid these succubus women in the form of public assistance. There's enough of this type of fraud that it should be law that paternity tests are mandatory right after each birth. It should be standard procedure to prevent this. But this will never happen because the state is empowering these single mothers in order to gain approval of female voters and to fill public coffers at the expense of men. The state has numerous social programs specifically designed to extract resources and labor from men and transfer them to women indirectly by taxation and directly through alimony and child support payments. And in the case of child support, the state has realized that if the biological father is in the wind or doesn't have the resources, the state will have to pay to support those women and their children out of their own coffers. That's why in cases like these, they don't care who the biological father is. They just want some man, it doesn't matter who, to pay up. Moreover, thanks to Title IV-D money, they can replenish their welfare coffers off the blood, sweat, and tears of non-custodial fathers. You see, and we'll get into this a little later, the government needs to do things like this in order to maintain the system. This is because of the decline in birth rates and the subsequent shrinking of the tax base. Birth rates of natural-born citizens have fallen below replacement values for years now. And I think currently it's about 1.6 or 1.7 births per woman in the U.S., and that's including immigrants. And those who breed at higher rates tend to be moochers rather than productive taxpayers. In fact, the more educated and affluent a group is, the lower their birth rate tends to be. This means the pool of victims is shrinking at the same time the already bloated gynocentric system is expanding. And what makes things worse is that the aging baby boomer generation is retiring and is in need of care at the same time the labor pool is dwindling. And the money that the boomers paid into the system was used up long ago. And that's the main reason why we see the national deficit ballooning. Now that the background has been laid by our discussion of the social, economic, and political drivers of modern Western society, I want to move on to the topic of the demographic winter and what it will mean for all men and for MGTOW in particular. I started to allude to it in part 1 of this video when I talked about preparing for the future. The demographic winter is a descriptor for the population decline in modern cultures and societies. This is what Wikipedia has to say on the topic of the causes of population decline and the economic consequences. The effects of a declining population can be adverse for an economy which has borrowed extensively for repayment by younger generations. Economically declining populations are thought to lead to deflation, which has a number of effects. For an agriculture or mining economy, the average standard of living in a declining population, at least in terms of material possessions, will tend to rise as the amount of land and resources per person will be higher. But for many industrial economies, the opposite might be true, as those economies often thrive on mortgaging the future by ways of debt and retirement transfer payments that originally assumed raising tax revenues from a continually expanding population base, i.e. there would be fewer taxpayers in a declining population. However, standard of living does not necessarily correlate with quality of life, which may increase as a population declines due to presumably reduced pollution and consumption of natural resources, and the decline of social pressures and overutilization of resources that can be linked to overpopulation. There may also be reduced pressure on infrastructure, education, and other services as well. The period immediately after the Black Death, for instance, was one of great prosperity, as the people had inheritances from many different family members. However, the situation was not comparable, as it did not have a continually declining population, but rather a sudden shock, followed by a population increase. Predictions of net economic and other effects from a slow and continuous population decline, i.e. due to low fertility rates, are mainly theoretical, since such a phenomenon is a relatively new and unprecedented one. A declining population due to low fertility rates will also be accompanied by a population aging, which can contribute problems for a society. This can adversely affect the quality of life for the young, as it increases the social and economic pressure in the sense that they have to increase their per capita output in order to support an infrastructure with costly and extensive care for the oldest among their population. This focus shifts away from planning of future families and therefore further degrades the rate of procreation. The decade-long economic malaise of Japan and Germany in the 1990s and early 2000s is often linked to these demographic problems, though there were also several other causes. The worst-case scenario is a situation where the population falls too low a level to support a current social welfare economic system, which is more likely to occur with rapid decline than a more gradual one. In a country with declining population, the growth of GDP per capita is higher than the growth of GDP. For example, Japan has a higher growth per capita than the United States, even though the US GDP growth is higher than Japan's. Even when GDP growth is zero or negative, the GDP growth per capita still may be positive if the population is shrinking faster than the GDP. A declining population, regardless of the cause, can also create a labor shortage, which can have a number of positive and negative effects. While some labor-intensive sectors of the economy may be hurt if a shortage is severe enough, others may adequately compensate by increasing outsourcing and/or automation. Initially, the labor participation rates, which are low in many countries, can also be increased to temporarily reduce or delay the shortage. On the positive side, such a shortage increases the demand for labor, which can potentially result in a reduced unemployment rate as well as higher wages. Conversely, a high population means labor is in plentiful supply, which usually means wages will be lower. This is seen in countries like China and India. Analyzing data from 40 countries shows that fertility well above replacement and population growth would typically be most beneficial for government budgets. So that's what Wikipedia has to say, which I think is an accurate assessment of the situation. And governments across the world, in a futile effort, are trying to shore up and stabilize their populations through a combination of immigration, both legal and illegal, and tax incentives to women and families with children. Here's a short list of examples of these types of incentives. Many European countries, including France, Italy, Germany, and Poland, have offered some combination of bonuses and monthly payments to families. Some Japanese localities facing significant population loss are offering parents $4,600 for the birth of a child and $460 for a 10-year period. The Republic of Singapore has similar plans, $3,000 for the first child, $9,000 in cash and savings for the second, and up to $18,000 each for the third and fourth child. Sweden has extensive parental leave where parents are entitled to share 16 months paid leave per child. The cost is divided between both the employer and the state. Russian President Vladimir Putin directed Parliament to adopt a 10-year program to stop the sharp decline in Russia's population, principally by offering financial incentives and subsidies to encourage women to have children. Australia currently offers a $5,000 bonus for every baby, plus additional fortnightly payments, free immunization scheme, and recently proposed to pay all child care costs for women who want to work. In the United States, the Obama administration proposes legislation that would grant amnesty to the estimated 1.4 million to 2 million young illegal immigrants through what is known as the DREAM Act. These young illegal immigrants would be offered legal status in return for attending college or joining the military. Violence Against Women Act 2000 created special rules for alien battered spouses and children to allow them to remain in the United States. This U.S. legislation, which amends the Public Health Services Act, PL 98-457, provides illegal immigrant women who could be deported residency and citizenship in the United States. And who do you think pays the price for all these incentives? You guessed it, primarily men, willing or not. The money to pay for all these social programs and incentives sure as hell doesn't come out of thin air. So we've discussed population decline, or what is known as the demographic winter. But what exactly is this Fempocalypse? I'm going to defer this question to a prominent MRA, Karen Strong, aka Girl Writes What. As usual, I'll post a link to her blog post in the description box. In her blog, she explains, quote, "Now that the transfer of surplus labor from men to women must go through a middleman who takes a slice of the pie only to get fatter and hungrier, you actually need more and more productivity on the ground to provide for women and children and to feed the beast of government. In Western countries, that beast has grown to 100 times the size it was before women's suffrage, and has begun pulling out the Visa card willy-nilly, pledging the labor of our children to foreign governments to finance the largesse of today. But what have we done? We've removed all motivation men have. But what have we done? We've removed all the motivation men have to be economic generators by removing all the benefit to them of marriage and children. So more and more are refusing to do the 50-hour-a-week thing and are opting for part-time jobs, beer, and Xbox instead. Others are simply too damaged and handicapped by the system we've created that they are incapable of being productive at all. So we actually have less productivity on the ground. And those children we're relying on to get us out of hock when foreign governments start calling in debts are only going to become less able to save our asses with every generation of them raised in single mother households. Men paying a greater share of the taxes is what's been funding all of this. But because of our decision to prioritize women's education over men's, this generation of men are now more likely to drop out of all levels of education, less likely to attend post-secondary, and already earn 8% less than the women do under 30. We are actually handicapping the earning power of the people who fund the system women need and prioritizing training and education for the people who are least likely to exploit it to its full economic potential. We are allowing women to banish fathers from their children's lives at no cost to themselves. In fact, the rewards to women for doing so are myriad and tangible. When we know all this disadvantages children and generates current and future costs to society, and we are disincentivizing men's productivity by offering them no realistic opportunity for children that are actually theirs or marriages that will last more than a few years, after which all benefits to them is gone while all the costs and obligations remain. While economists in Japan are freaking out over Japanese men going their own way, men don't actually have to consciously go their own way to bring about a fempocalypse. They don't need to start riding all over the place like in London or begin waking up en masse to the fact that the male privilege they supposedly enjoy amounts to shut up and get to the back of the line, the way it did at the Occupy protest. All that needs to happen is for us to keep right on giving women everything they want and keep right on marginalizing men, and eventually there won't be enough surplus productivity on the ground to hold up the increasingly bloated system women require, and it will fall." Close quote. There's really not much to add to Girl Writes What's description of the fempocalypse. The state's various forms of wealth distribution and taxation will be the cause of the collapse of modern Western civilization. Its insatiable need for greater wealth and power, coupled with an electorate whose biology compels it to appropriate as many resources and provision as possible through political means, no matter how much of a burden it is to the rest of the electorate, will bring about the fempocalypse. Now, in conclusion, I want you to consider this for a moment. If women were so independent, so empowered, no one would even care that men are opting out. There wouldn't be this big push to try to trick, shame, and otherwise manipulate and force men into going back to the plantation. No one would ever care about the herbivore men in Japan, or the sexists in the UK, or the marriage strike, or MGTOW for that matter. If the state wasn't so dependent on the gynocentric machine, there'd be no need for all these ever-expanding, ever-intrusive laws that have been put into place in order to siphon off excess resources and labor from men. But they do exist. And the purpose of these so-called laws is not justice, nor the, quote, best interest of the children, nor the safety and well-being of all citizens. They exist as a coercive lifeline to a parasitic caste in society and as a tool for the political elite to garner even more power and wealth. Whether we realize it or not, MGTOW and what I'm calling anti-gynos, that includes marriage strikers, the sexists, all those who are going in the opposite direction or in opposition to the gynocentric culture, all of us are on a collision course with the largesse of government. Inadvertently, we're increasingly becoming an enemy of the state because of our non-revolution revolution, if you will. And what's most disheartening to me is that men are in a position to correct the injustices that we face and to help one another out. However, I believe because of our lizard brain instinct to view each other as competition and to seek power, we view each other as the enemy instead of as brothers, as fellow men. By now, it should be abundantly clear that the government's ever-increasing move towards male to female wealth transfer cannot be halted or satiated. So what can we do as MGTOW to prepare ourselves for Fempocalypse in the demographic winter? Well, right off the top of my head, I came up with 8 things that we can do. Number 1, invest wisely and cautiously. This not only includes retirement savings such as 401ks and IRAs, but we should also have an emergency fund. Various experts say that we should have anywhere from 3 to 12 months worth of emergency savings. In my opinion, 6 months is a minimum. Number 2, develop a marketable skill. Being a manager or simply a paper pusher will not be a very marketable or useful skill if shit hits the fan. However, hard skills like carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, even softer skills such as maybe accounting and engineering will be useful. 3, cultivate an entrepreneurial spirit. I believe the government will increasingly use employers to extract resources from single men who do not have children in order to provide for and give resources to women. 4, have hard physical assets. This may include real estate, equipment, or even precious metals. 5, have a DIY or do-it-yourself mentality, even when you have the money to pay for services instead of doing them yourself. These services might include things like household maintenance and automotive repair. This will not only save you a lot of money, but will also provide you with an invaluable education. 6, live within your means and debt-free. While I acknowledge that some debt is necessary, like a mortgage for a house, maybe a loan for a modest vehicle, but it will be very difficult to truly go your own way if you're unduly burdened with excessive consumer debt. 7, if you're financially able or have the opportunity through your employment, travel and experience other cultures. Educate yourself about other cultures and maybe even learn a second language. You might find yourself a potential second or even alternative home. And 8, I think it's the most important one. Be aware of the change in your environment. That is to say, be cognizant of the changes in your political, economic, and social environment. If we're aware of those changes, we'll be able to adapt and better protect ourselves. Well, gentlemen, I hope you found this video useful. This concludes part 2. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is Emancipated Soul. I'm out.